Welcome to the Explainer. When we look back at the architectural marvels of the past millennium, we see some truly astonishing feats. We've got Angkor Wat, built over a literal swamp back in 1150. We have the Leaning Tower of Pisa, somehow defying gravity for 800 years on a foundation that's just 3 meters deep. But standing head and shoulders above them all, enduring every single storm for the past 400 years, is the ultimate engineering mystery. It's perhaps the most beautiful construction project in human history, the Taj Mahal. Designed and built between 1631 and 1653 by Emperor Shah Jahan, it is an absolute masterclass in ancient engineering. But today, we aren't just looking at its history, we're actually looking at its blueprint.
So, I want you to step into the shoes of a modern-day project manager for a second. Let's say we're tasked with building a perfect one-to-one replica of the Taj Mahal right now in the 21st century. What would it actually take? Do we even have the technology, the manpower, or the money to pull off this masterpiece today? Now, you might think, with all our advanced tools and heavy machinery, it'd be a walk in the park compared to 400 years ago, right? Well, actually, scratch that. The reality is far more challenging, incredibly complex, and shockingly expensive.
Okay, let's dive into this blueprint from the ground up. We're going to cover 1. Fixing a muddy foundation, 2. The marble and framework, 3. The art of pietra dura, 4. Illusions and tilted minarets, and finally 5. The billion-dollar price tag.
Part 1. Fixing a muddy foundation. Engineering on a swamp.
The absolute very first challenge of our hypothetical mega project is the location itself. The Taj Mahal was built right on the shifting, wet, muddy banks of the Yamuna River. Any normal building weighing hundreds of thousands of tons, it's just going to sink straight into the mud. Yet, back in 1632, the Mughal engineers came up with this miraculous solution. First, they dug these incredibly deep wells. Historical records say anywhere from 25 up to 1,000 of them straight down through the muck until they hit solid bedrock. Then they did something brilliant. They took massive logs of ebony and mahogany and inserted them into the wells. Why those specific woods? Because when ebony and mahogany are submerged in water, instead of rotting, they actually absorb the moisture and become literally as dense and solid as steel over the centuries. They filled the rest of the space with a mix of mud, lime, and tree resin, and finally topped the whole thing with a massive, solid stone platform. This genius wooden foundation is exactly why the Taj Mahal hasn't shifted a single inch in 4 centuries.
But if we're rebuilding this today, oh man, we've got a problem. Modern construction regulations wouldn't even let us dream of putting a wooden foundation right next to a river. Plus, finding that quantity of perfect old-growth mahogany today is pretty much impossible. So we'd have to swap the 17th century logs for 21st century engineering. We'd need heavy drilling machines to bore out over 600 holes, each about 1.5 meters wide, plunging 150 feet deep to hit bedrock. Then we'd drive massive steel piles into those holes and fill them all up with cutting-edge, water-resistant concrete.
And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of the logistics we're dealing with. Once those subsurface steel pillars are dry, we have to pour a massive 5-meter-thick concrete slab over the entire 3-acre footprint. That's about 6,700 cubic meters of concrete. To pull that off today, imagine a convoy of over 7,500 giant concrete mixer trucks just lining up at the construction site. It's an absolute logistical nightmare.
So, what's the damage for just getting out of the mud? Between building a massive cofferdam to hold back the river water, driving the 600 steel piles, and bringing in thousands of trucks to pour concrete, our modern invoice is already taking a huge hit. We're looking at roughly $250 million, $250 million bucks. And remember, we haven't even placed a single piece of white marble yet. This foundation process alone would easily take 2 full years.
Moving on to Section 2. The marble and framework. Moving mountains of white stone. Now, when you look at the Taj Mahal, it honestly looks like it was carved out of a single, solid white mountain. But that leads to a massive misconception about its core. The Taj Mahal is not solid marble. If it were, it would be way too heavy. Check this out. A standard red brick weighs about 3 kilograms, but a marble brick of the exact same size weighs 5.5 kilograms. That's an 83% increase in weight. If the Mughals had built the core out of solid marble, the sheer crushing weight would have overwhelmed the foundation and sunk the entire structure right into the swamp. So they built the actual structural walls using red bricks and lime mortar, and then used the glorious white marble purely as a casing, just thin slabs to hide the brickwork. Today, we'd use reinforced concrete and steel for the core, which is standard stuff, but sourcing that white marble casing is where the modern headache really begins.
The Mughals used a very specific flawless white stone, Makrana marble, sourced from Rajasthan, which is about 300 kilometers away from Agra. To move 7,000 tons of it back then, they used a network of over 1,000 elephants and thousands of ox carts, dragging massive stones up a custom-built 9-kilometer mud ramp. Today, Makrana marble is incredibly limited and easily one of the most expensive stones on Earth. To move that same volume today, we'd need a fleet of over 1,100 heavy-duty transport trucks. To keep the project on a tight modern schedule, you'd basically have a truck arriving at the construction site every 15 minutes, non-stop, for 8 straight months.
And getting it out of the ground is even crazier. To extract that volume of pristine, grade A marble today without shattering it to pieces, we can't just use dynamite. We have to use diamond wire saws. These are heavy machines that slice through the earth using diamond-coated cables. To get enough marble within our 5-year timeline, we'd need to run 250 of these diamond wire saws continuously, day and night. That requires a mind-blowing 864,000 megawatt-hours of electricity. To put that into perspective, that's literally the exact same amount of electricity used by the entire country of the Maldives in a single year.
All right, let's add all of that to our mental receipt. Leasing the remaining deep mines, dealing with a massive 70% waste factor when cutting the marble, buying the diamond saws, paying that astronomical 5-year electricity bill, and running the fleet of trucks, all of that brings the framework and marble phase to a staggering $1.08 billion.
Section 3. The Art of Pietratura, the Irreplaceable Human Touch.
So now we're shifting away from the heavy machinery into the absolute most delicate phase of the explainer. If you've ever looked closely at the walls of the Taj Mahal, you've probably seen those stunning, colorful floral patterns. Well, those aren't paintings, that is Pietratura. It's the painstaking art of carving exact millimeter-deep shapes into the hard marble, and then taking semi-precious stones, shaping them perfectly, and fitting them into those grooves so tightly that there isn't even a hair's breadth of a gap between them. During the Mughal era, Shah Jahan scoured all of India, Persia, and Central Asia to bring in thousands of master artists to pull this off.
So the crucial point here is that you cannot just machine your way out of this. You can't just 3D print this or slap a laser cutter on it and walk away. Modern lasers can cut the basic shapes, sure, but they completely lack the ability to read the natural, delicate curves and veins of the stone. To get that seamless, polished perfection, it absolutely requires a highly trained human eye and a delicate human touch. We would literally have to scour the globe today to find around 5,000 master artisans who still possess this ancient skill. And even with modern lasers helping to cut the initial edges, it would still require 5 straight years of intense manual labor to finish the intricate stonework. Employing, housing, and maintaining a specialized workforce of 5,000 master artisans for 5 continuous years, plus the cost of the modern cutting setups and the precious stones themselves, that adds another hefty $220 million to our invoice.
Section 4. Illusions and Tilted Minarets, 17th Century Architectural Magic.
Before we finalize our bill, we have to account for the architectural Easter eggs that the Mughal engineers practically hid in plain sight. Take the shrinking illusion, for example. As you stand outside the main gate, the Taj Mahal looks massive. But as you walk closer, it actually appears to shrink. It's a highly calculated optical effect. Furthermore, the marble was selected and angled specifically so its color shifts dramatically depending on the sunlight throughout the day. They even calculated the exact placement of the fountains and the front ponds so that when the water ripples, the reflection of the Taj Mahal remains completely flawless and undistorted. This is basically state-of-the-art computational engineering, done centuries before the first computer ever existed.
And then there are the minarets. If you look at the 4 towering 43-meter minarets surrounding the tomb, they look perfectly straight, but that's a geometrical optical illusion. They're actually tilted 0.5 degrees outward. Why? 2 big reasons. First, if they were perfectly 90 degrees straight up, the human eye would actually perceive them as leaning inward, so the slight outward tilt corrects our vision. Secondly, if a massive earthquake hits, this outward tilt guarantees that the heavy stone pillars will fall away from the central dome, protecting the tomb inside. Replicating this brilliant, precise dual-purpose tilt today is a highly specialized engineering task that adds about $100,000 to our structural costs.
Finally, Section 5, the billion-dollar price tag, tallying the invoice.
Okay, let's pull all these hypothetical costs together into one master receipt. We've laid the foundation, raised the marble walls, inlaid the precious stones, and perfected the optical illusions. The modern cost breakdown is pretty staggering. Foundation and stabilizing the swamp,
$250 million. The structural framework, mining that rare Macrana marble and transporting it, $1.08 billion. 5 years of Pietradura art by 5,000 artisans, $220 million. The precision engineering of those outward-leaning minarets, $100,000. Our total projected bill to build a replica of the Taj Mahal today comes out to roughly $1.6 billion. And here's the kicker. This completely excludes the cost of buying 42 acres of prime real estate on the riverbank, and it doesn't include a single tree, flower, or fountain in those massive surrounding gardens. Add land and landscaping, and you're easily pushing past the $2 billion mark.
But what did it cost back then? Official records state it cost the Mughal Empire around 32 million rupees. Now, adjusting for inflation over centuries is tricky, but historians look at purchasing power. Back then, 1 rupee bought so much that 32 million rupees represented a staggering 15% of the total annual income of the entire Mughal Empire. Think about that. One of the wealthiest empires on the planet dedicated 15% of its entire yearly revenue to a single, non-functional monument of memory. No modern nation on Earth would ever dedicate 15% of its national wealth to a project with absolutely zero financial return. No way!
Which leads us to a pretty profound conclusion. Technically, mechanically, yes, we could absolutely rebuild the Taj Mahal today. It would take massive resources, billions of dollars, and years of grueling manual labor, but we could do it. The real question, though, is one of passion. We have the technology to replicate the structure, but could modern society ever replicate the sheer, unbridled passion required to spend 15% of a nation's wealth purely in the name of a memory? The Mughal engineers didn't just stack white stones. They embedded the absolute dedication and limitless wealth of an entire empire into this marble. The Taj Mahal was truly a once-in-a-human history event. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you in the next one.